What I want to talk about today is about begging. Begging. So what is begging? What is the definition of begging? Begging is asking for something, asking for money, material, food, or a service, with the expectation that you're giving nothing in return. It's where you're asking for something, taking it, and providing nothing. Nothing in return for that. That's what begging is. But it's interesting because you think, well, who gets what out of begging? Because on the surface, it seems pretty obvious. Well, the person who's getting the money, the food, or the service, they're getting something from the begging. They get it. They get everything. The other person that gives gets nothing. Incorrect. I would say that's very wrong. And the reason is because when someone gives something, they receive something. And people subconsciously recognise that. They recognise that they're getting something back in return for that. It may not seem like it on the surface. They may not recognise that that's the case, but that is the case. And so most people, when they're giving money, why do they do it? Because they feel better about themselves. They feel better. It gives meaning to their life. A lot of us live fairly mundane, meaningless, petty lives, and just to have some skerrick of meaning to that life can make it all worthwhile. Hell, if giving a few dollars to a beggar on the street makes me feel good about myself, so be it. But it's interesting though, I don't want to harp on about religion because I pretty much do that every time I do a talk here, but come on, you can't look at begging and not consider religion. Pretty much every religion relies on donations. Now, why have I brought that into begging? It's this idea that I'm giving something and I'm not going to get anything in return. But if you look through history, you look through the Christian tradition, and people in the Middle Ages, they could pay the church to get to heaven. So if they had sinned all their life, they can pay the church, and the church would say, yes, you are going to heaven. Now, when I had left school and I had my first job and I wasn't earning much money, but I had this intense desire for some spiritual experience, and I remember, well, what are the traditional means for that spirituality? What is the channel for that? Christianity. That's the lifestyle I was brought up in. So I started going to a church. Now, this church was a bit on the fundamental side, but what they talked about is giving. And how do you give when you're at church? You see, the devil doesn't want you to give, but God does. So what you do is you tithe every week. Do you know what tithing means? Tithing is where you give a percentage, and it's traditionally 10% of your income to the church. Now, if you don't do that, it means you're giving in to the devil. So if you want to be a good Christian, then you tithe. But, here's the catch, it's not 10% of your net income, it's 10% of your gross. Now, come on, I look back now and I look back with anger and disdain that to give this impression that God's there and at the end of the financial year, he's getting my group certificate and he's looking through it and he's tallying up whether it was 10% of my gross or my net. But that was what they were proposing. Needless to say, I'm no longer with that group. I didn't stay there for that long. Have you ever heard the term, if you want to get someone to like you, get them to do something for you? Have you heard that before? And I heard that and I thought that seems like a weird thing, because I would have thought the opposite. Get someone who you don't like to do something for you and they'll like you. They'll begin to like you. But then when I thought about it does make sense, because no one is going to do something for you if they don't like you. Right? But if someone is doing something to help you, they would rationalise that. Why? They would be rationalising, why am I doing this for this person? Because I must like them. because of course I wouldn't do something for someone I didn't like. So therefore I must like this person. So it's a way of turning that around. So maybe next time if there's someone that you don't really like and you want to get them engaged, or you would like to turn things around, try to get them to help you. Ask them to help you with something. Try to get them to do something for you. Whether it's borrowing a book, bringing in a book for you to read, or helping you with what you're doing, some sort of task. In terms of begging, there's begging all over the world. It doesn't matter where you go, it's going on. Now, I was in Bangkok recently, and my son James had a big issue with the beggars there. And the first time we got there and we were walking along, he just started freaking out. He was crying and we couldn't say, what's wrong, what's wrong? And as it turned out, it was because we'd passed by some beggars. Now they're not very pretty, the beggars in Bangkok. They had these guys, either one leg or no legs. They would be lying straight on the footpath, right in the middle of the footpath. They'd have a begging bowl. They'd push it forward and then they'd swim on the sidewalk like this to get to it. And so he just freaked out by this. He saw people without hands and he just started crying. And we said, look, what's wrong? And he said, I don't want to get leprosy like they do. So he had been attending Buddhism at school, and for some reason they had been covering diseases in people, and leprosy being the main one. I don't know why, but he thought he could catch leprosy, and so he was petrified that by walking past he was going to catch some disease from these people. So we told him, okay, that's not going to be the case, but even still, he would just keep very clear of them. One day we're walking along and he just started shaking. We go, what's wrong, what's wrong? And he's on the verge of tears and he goes, there's the man back there and he's got no head. And I go, what? No, what? Hang on a minute, no head. So I look back and it looked like there's a guy there. He's sitting on the ground and he had his arms around his knees and he had his head down and he had his jumper over his head. And it looked like this guy had no head. So I had to explain to him that you can't be alive if you don't have a head. So it's these assumptions that you make as a parent that, oh yes, of course, everyone knows that if you don't have a head, you can't live. But to a 6-year-old, that wasn't the case. So what I've found in the last 10 years, last 5 years especially, there's been a dramatic increase in the number of people begging, even in the CBD in Sydney. So how many corners is there a person sitting on the ground with a piece of cardboard and a begging bowl in front of them? Man, they are nearly on every corner. I remember when a few years ago I saw these two guys and they're laughing, they're joking, so yes, having a smoke, having a great time, and said, okay, yeah, bye, I'll see you later. This guy goes, yeah, okay, see you later. And he sits down on the ground, gets his begging bowl out, puts it out there, puts his sob story on the piece of cardboard next to him, and then goes like that. Like 5 seconds before, he's laughing and joking. There's a guy in front on the corner of George and Market Street, and you would have seen him. He's there all the time on the corner of Maya. His name is Ken Johnson. Now, I found an article about him yesterday. Ken Johnson, the article was written in 2008 when Ken Johnson was 52. That guy earns, he said, roughly about $50,000 a year. 50,000 tax-free, which is the equivalent to about an $80,000 job. Now he says, well, the hours are hard. He puts in about 16 hours a day there sometimes. 16 hours a day of sitting there. It just so happened, though, when he was being interviewed, he said, well, I've had 3 hours off this morning, so I had a nice breakfast at Hungry Jack's. Good for him. Okay, I'm not going to be judgmental about people begging, or I don't want to be too judgmental about people asking for money in Australia. But I think in Australia it is quite different from countries like Bangkok. Australia does have a pretty good welfare system. Does it cover the cost for cigarettes, alcohol, gambling? No, I don't think it does. But for the basic necessities of life, it is there and it should cover the major costs of living.